Good afternoon, lovely people. Today, I want to talk to you about a unique responsibility within the world of software engineering, the role of incident commander. I've been part of the incident commander rotation at a large European e-commerce company for the past few years. Through this and my time as a site reliability engineer, I have been exposed to numerous incidents, from the occasional, this is not in fact an incident, to we need the CTO on the phone right now. Incident Commander is a hugely exciting role that I would really encourage anyone considering to try it as part of their professional development. To that end, let's go into what an Incident Commander is even, their roles and responsibilities, how to prepare for the role, and what that position actually looks like in practice. Today, I'm not going to cover the specifics of incident response in general. I'm going to assume that you know about this topic. If this is new to you, that's fine. Check out the articles I hereby declare this an incident and help I'm now on call. These are both designed to help you understand what incident response is in principle, as well as prepare for it in practice as a responder. For incident commanders, there are a few things that we need to pay special attention to during incident response. These include the severity of the incident, the stakeholders involved, and the maturity of responders. Let's start at the start by digging into severity. The severities we see as an incident commander vary widely. Everything from somebody deployed something and should roll it back to this is going to appear on the news tomorrow and we'd better wake up the crisis management team. We're usually the most senior technical stakeholder in the room, indeed the most empowered unless some sort of senior manager turns up, and we thus need to make a set of decisions factoring in the current level of impact, the risk of future impact, and the likelihood of recovery. We bucket this impact into a kind of severity level, and we'll make decisions that make a trade-off between the risk of that decision and the likelihood of recovery as a result of it. Let's assume then that we understand the current incident severity. We then need to work with stakeholders involved to try and find that crucial path to recovery. On paper, only a few people are actually involved in incident response. We have the responder fixing the issue, and maybe a scribe making notes, and then you as the incident commander. In practice, as the issue gets more and more significant, we have many additional stakeholders turn up. We might have, for example, management looking for clarity on the current issue and to really make it clear that this deserves the focus of all of the people involved. Also, often to offer help and coordination. We might also have sideline experts who are watching the incident in a public channel or otherwise doing a kind of off-book investigation who have learned something that they believe is beneficial. Product owners who are suddenly powerless to do anything about their work and they're watching their hard-earned customer trust just wash away. Non-experts who are trying to help by supplying any additional information or reporting on the issue in parallel without understanding the existing context. Each of these stakeholders requires a level of coordination to ensure that they can contribute to, or at least do not hinder, the response. So we now have an understanding of the severity of the incident and we know who is part of the response. The next thing that we need to do is evaluate the maturity of the different responders. In principle, an organization optimizes to ensure that things are available. They usually have a group of people tasked with this responsibility and they allocate those people time and effort required to practice and improve their response. In practice, however, an organization comprises of a really diverse set of people, each of whom has a unique set of expertise and capabilities. Sometimes those capabilities are less developed than we might expect, given a person's assigned responsibility as an on-call engineer. Some of the challenges that our less experienced responders can face are they may freeze. Just due to an incident's sheer stress, a responder might not think clearly and they either freeze entirely or they might get stuck really hyper-focused on what turns out to be an irrelevant part of the investigation. This is understandably exaggerated if that same responder also triggered or caused the incident. They may offload responsibility, so they might review their systems and conclude nothing's wrong with us and therefore it's somebody else's problem. They'll involve that somebody else and then they'll leave. This is understandable but unacceptable during a response. Information usually evolves too quickly and we often need those responders back. And they may not know. They may not know how to debug a system, where a system's telemetry is, or what the consequences of a given decision might be in terms of the business. These are all surprising during the process of actually responding to an incident, but Over a long enough time, they happen really predictably. It's part of an incident commander's mandate to try and help those responders overcome those challenges. And with that, an incident commander knows what they need to start engaging in an incident. Let's talk now about what happens when an actual incident occurs. First, the incident commander is going to get paged. They'll read the chat and develop a good understanding of the severity of the incident, the stakeholders, and the maturity of those involved. What's their actual role in this mess? An incident commander is tasked with structuring the response to minimize the impact on the business. The practicalities of this structuring include structuring communication, making decisions, managing stakeholders, managing more complex incidents, kicking off crisis management, and working with things that are like, but not quite, incidents. Let's start at first just by talking about structuring communication. An incident is a high-stress moment with many people coordinating around a single issue. Frequently, people start to take shortcuts with their communication and messages can become a bit vague. For example, let's say we have responder A who says the flop system is broke. B might respond broke and A might respond yeah broke, it doesn't work anymore. C might chip in with what does the graph say, B says it works for me and A says nope, it's broke. With stressed people, this quickly deteriorates and can end up with people either getting snippy with each other, making demands, or working in parallel without coordinating. As more and more people join the response, it becomes unworkable and we lose valuable time just understanding each other rather than analyzing the problem to intervene. As incident commanders, we need to intervene and clearly set the communication expectations. Often, we can do this simply by reading through the thread and articulating everything that's happened so far in a status message. For example, let's imagine that I am the incident commander in this particular case. I might say something like, so far I understand the customer experience impact is that the customers cannot purchase a flop. Our underlying hypothesis of this failure is that either, number one, we are running out of disk space. This is verified by responder A. Or number two, we're overloading the CPU. This can be verified by responder B. Our estimated time to recovery could be up to an hour and is very unpredictable. Please add a plus emoji to this message if this is correct. Such a message sets the expectation for how communication should be and summarizes a bunch of the communication that's kind of happening in little bits between the responders. Responders quickly rally around this, either correcting the message directly or endorsing it with that plus emoji. This can then quiet that thread, letting the responders focus until there's some sort of discovery or intervention. Whenever there is, it might still appear in a piecemeal fashion. Let's imagine that A turns up and says, the disk is full. As incident commanders, we can tidy this up by setting expectations and clarifying with actual data. Let's imagine that I see this disk is full message. I might respond saying something like, I'm struggling to understand your message as it doesn't contain the context I mean. Do you mean that the disk with the ID, a service disk, has 0 free space according to the graph at HTTP blah, 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 blah? The responder will usually come back and say something like, yep, sorry, we'll add this in future. After which the communication usually improves. The next thing an incident commander needs to kind of watch for is the necessity to make a decision. As the incident response goes on, there often comes a point where a responder can intervene, but that intervention will come with some risk. Let's say, for example, they may disable a broken payment method, even though that payment method is used by 50% of users in that country, or they may need to make a large number of products unavailable while they repair that product data. The responder may be able to supply some information about the consequences, but doesn't feel sufficiently empowered to make that decision. An incident commander is empowered to make these decisions. They need to balance the impact on the customer experience given the alternative, and then the impact to the business. They need to assess whether other better informed stakeholders are available to make that decision, or whether or not we need to trade off and make that decision more quickly. Ultimately, they need to provide a path forward for the responder. There are really no correct solutions here, but commanders are expected to know enough to make reasonable decisions the majority of the time. Decisions can always be retrospected after an incident is repaired in the postmortem. So, incident commanders need to structure communication and occasionally make decisions. Meanwhile, as the incident goes on, more and more stakeholders are starting to turn up around this particular incident. The incident commander is responsible for managing the interaction between these stakeholders and the responders. These might be people who are supposed to be present, or they might be people who are just trying to be helpful. The problem is that those stakeholders can start to distract those who are actually repairing the issue, either with requests for clarification, this usually comes from management, or helpful ideas about restoring the service, this usually comes from other engineers. To repair a system, especially if the underlying failure is non-intuitive, the responders need to be able to focus. This means that while the messages addressed to responders are well-intentioned, they're also degrading the response. As incident commanders, we need to take away as much of the burden of communication from responders as possible and work to manage the expectations of those trying to contribute. We can encourage people to send technical insights they have to us privately to keep them out of the main thread, and if we catch one that is especially useful, we'll ask that contributor to surface it in the main thread and actually join the response. We also need to communicate proactively with our non-technical stakeholders, translating the technical findings of the incident so far into information that these stakeholders can take action on. This can be as simple as really clearly conveying the current customer experience, or giving an estimation for time to recovery, or simply reassuring people that yes, the response is happening and just to ask them to be patient. Occasionally, some incidents are so substantial that they require multiple parallel efforts to restore system functionality. This could be, for example, a team executing a repetitive task, like repairing a DNS record, or figuring out different teams how to repair their services. Let's say if you're shifting your service outside a broken availability zone. During such a response, it's up to the incident commander to survey the available people and then either to task specific people with something that they should do. The incident commander should also set up a kind of ad hoc management process. This is often just a Google Sheet or a Google Doc to keep track of these tasks and identify any people who are stuck or anything that needs intervention. This can take substantial mental effort. The critical thing in these cases is to maintain an overview of the current impact, the hypotheses, and the interventions that people are doing. This means that some part of the incident commander's responsibility should be delegated to other incident commanders or senior colleagues on hand. For example, managing communications, communicating with management, or updating sheets can all be delegated to somebody else while that incident commander maintains that really critical overview. There are occasions when a technical issue has such substantial ramifications that it will mean either the company loses a large amount of customer trust, or money, or appears in the news. This is beyond the usual remit of incident response, but parts of the company are designed to cope with these challenges. An incident responder should kick off these crisis management teams and empower them with whatever it is they need to control the narrative around what's happening with the system. Occasionally, these teams will come back with requests, something like, can we put a notice up over here, or can we identify customers in order to apologize, send them a voucher or something? The commander has to prioritize and implement these requests against the backdrop of the incident. Lastly, there are occasions where something happens that simply no one has planned for. Still, it is sufficiently urgent that it bypasses all software deliverables and is worth as much effort as we can bring to bear on it. One example might be a security issue that affects many different systems. This is something like Log4j and is just outside the normal security response process. Incident commanders are frequently involved in these incidents for their experience in managing such urgent tasks, for their relationships with responders, and for their credibility within the community. While the incident might not follow, shall we say, the traditional incident process, the commander can still help deliver a critical and immediate business requirement in these cases. So, the incident commander must understand the severity, the stakeholders, and their maturity to manage an incident. Their management role includes setting communication expectations, managing stakeholders, managing large incidents, working with crisis managements, working with issues that are simply off the beaten path. The next question is, how do we actually prepare for this as incident commanders for this broad range of responsibilities? What characterizes the incident commander role, at least in my experience, is that it tends to be involved in issues that are outside the normal process. This makes the role challenging, as it's essentially preparing for the unexpected, and the unexpected is, well, unexpected. That's it. There are things that incident commanders can do. The first is to practice. An incident response process empowers responders to prioritize, communicate, and respond to production issues, but it doesn't usually say too much about the response. The response depends on the specific technical stack, the business impact, the stakeholders, and many other organizational contexts. The only way to understand what the responders are going through is to be a responder. Because incident commanders are usually only called for issues that are kind of more critical than the average incident, they should have experience with similarly critical incidents. This allows them to build an amount of empathy with what those responders are going through, what can be the most challenging professional experience of their career so far, as well as to build a toolkit as to how to understand the impact, manage these responders, and otherwise coordinate these incidents. Once they have that experience, they should join the incident commander rotation in the shadow role to get perspective on the other side of that responsibility, as well as build the required business context and relationships. In addition to practicing significant production issues, an incident commander is expected to understand the business itself. An incident commander will tend to be involved in more substantial issues, and occasionally they'll need to make time-sensitive decisions which can have a broad impact on the customer experience. They can only do that effectively if they also understand the business, the customer experience, and the software architecture, and they can make a judgment as to which is the better technical path to follow. Gaining a better understanding of the business comes from just dedicated time to learning it, reading each domain's top-level strategies and significant design documents, and then kind of understanding the approximate software architecture. It will evolve, of course, but a business's core deliverables are stable over many years. Related to the understanding of a business kind of on paper, it is really nice to understand the people who are actually executing on these strategies to make these designs a reality. The incident commander interacts with a real broad range of stakeholders across a range of job roles, and they must communicate in ways that suit each stakeholder. Additionally, they have hopefully established this communication outside the bounds of the incident itself. Good relationships allow much of the communication to be implicit, and stakeholders are much more likely to trust the incident commander's judgment until such a time it can be reviewed. Now, as a bit of a pro tip for your career, this communication doesn't necessarily have to be two-way. Being seen as a visible technical expert with good communication skills makes life much easier. Lastly, and maybe most contentiously, an incident commander will have a much easier life if they've developed sufficient or substantial debugging skills and can reason through the behavior of a real broad range of systems. Let's start by being abundantly clear. If you are an incident commander and you are debugging an incident yourself during a response, the incident is in deep trouble. That's not to say that it doesn't happen, it does every so often. But an incident commander's core value is in enabling others' excellent technical work rather than being an expert themselves. When they are needed, skills in reasoning a system through from first principles, for example, as a system of constrained resources or a system of queues or in its interactions with the kernel, are most helpful in understanding a broad range of systems and runtimes and architectures. After that, reading about the different designs or the code of different runtimes, the JVM or Scala or Node or Go, are all very useful as they have frequently excellent debugging capabilities that responders have never used before. In the end, it's all just kind of bits flowing through a network to get run on some sort of CPU core and occasionally written to disk. Okay, so to recap, Incident Commander is an exciting role. It exists primarily to catalyze response rather than to contribute directly. That means we must understand the severity, the stakeholders, and the maturity of responders and work by structuring communication, making decisions, managing stakeholders, significant incidents, or anything that's kind of off the beaten path. There's no secret to preparation. Save taking the time to practice, especially in incidents that have the same severity that incident commanders are regularly involved in. This practice, as well as developing a broad business understanding, stakeholder relationships, and good debugging skills can go a long way to making an effective incident commander. Hopefully this reassures you that incident commanders are in fact human, and that with time and effort, you too can join their ranks. I hope you found this video helpful. I'm especially interested in hearing your feedback about what is or is not helpful, your questions about the topic more generally, or if you have additional thoughts that you might have as another expert in this domain. Just add them in the comments. If you want more of this content, I can recommend subscribing to this channel. I will keep making it so long as people keep watching it. Thank you very much and see you later.